So this is an update to my previous video where I was talking about making a battle royale game. I've now decided it's a roguelike with battle royale elements, or at least that's what my goal is now. So there's not much like visually to show. This is still very similar. This box has changed, and I'll get to that. Um, what the big change here is I've made a menuing system now, and I want to talk about my approach to that compared to my approach to some previous things. So, for example, I have options now, and I can go to audio and all that. I have a main menu, play the game, so on, pause menu. Um, so the difference here in the way I approach this compared to some of my other things that are similar, like the items, the abilities, all that sort of stuff in the game, I did it in the more I would say traditional approach, which is making a new file, new object. This is object oriented programming. So a new object per item versus what I wanted to do with the abilities, passives, weapons, so on. I wanted to be able to just have all the functionality I'd ever need for that sort of object in the one file. So I could do something like this, like I have here, where I just input a bunch of specifications, and then the code, whenever I go to update something, ability, whatever it is, dot update, it would figure out what to do based on move, if it's a movement type with the teleport, if it's a damaging type ability, if it's a healing type ability, so on. But I realized this is really complicated to get it to work properly because you have to make a whole bunch of if statements. I don't know if they're in this file. I think they're in the player one. If we go to the player definition over here, oh, in the actual implement. Here we go. Yeah, it's like you check. Okay, is it a movement ability? Okay, what type of movement ability? And then you do so on and so forth. And it's a lot of that, and it doesn't look as clean as compared to having a subfile system in the programming side of it, instead of filling this up. It just doesn't feel as good as over here with the I have a menus object which just organizes and controls all the other menu, like actual menus. So I all I have to do is I make the main menu object, which I made back, um, yeah, right here, and all I have to do for the main menu object, and objects, all these menu objects are inherited from the menu state object over here. This is the building block for all the menus. That way they can all be put into the same uh, vector. And then all I have to do is not. I don't even have to iterate through it. I just have to have each menu object pass back to the menus to this handler which one to update, because this is a sorry, I said it was a vector. This is a map, a hash map. That's all I have to do is take the current menu, which is um, this enum, and it'll just update that current menu, and it takes the window, takes the game, and updates that. Uh, an example of the function. This is the menu state. The menu state itself isn't used. It's just the building block for inheritance. So what the menu state has as an object are these functions: just initialize images, initialize text, and I'll get to that in a second. Um, get functions, all your basic stuff. Set positions and update. This is the core for just how menus work, or how I've set up the menus work. So over here, initialize images. It initializes the text first, and that's important because what we do is we have a text vector. If I want to add a new piece of text, all I have to do is I take this, or yeah, and set it as whatever text I want. Um, oh, sorry. It is a SFML text object, so I just change it here. So, thing. And what will happen if I were to apply this and this were actually able to be loaded, the menu state object itself, not loadable. Well, it's not set up to be loaded here. But anyways, what it would do is the way this works, it'll base what images, which are just these, it says resume here, the icon behind it, it'll load that based on which text, or how much text there is, and it auto generates the length of this. So if you go to options, you can see this is smaller. It gets rid of this one extra down here. And if I were to have another menu or option down here, it would stick it here. So it's really simple to add a new element to this menu, or to any menu that I have. That includes the main menu. Like I was saying, and so I don't have any graphics options, and like I was saying down here, it added an extra one back. That was this back functionality was a little tricky to implement, but I'm kind of going all over the place. Trying to get back to where we were. Right. So all it does is it takes size, simple loop through the vector, the text vector, and just add to the sprites vector, add another texture per text. And this is just set up to get it oriented into this sort of positioning. And then that's it. If I want to, well, here's the set positions part. And so you do set positions for update. That way, it's if you move in game. Sorry about that. So if I move over here, it's still set up properly and all that. This comes into bigger play later because you could have it reset, whatnot. Whatever. It seems more difficult than updating the position. More to keep track of, rather. Yeah, and so this, since it's just the base, the building block of the other menus, I just have it sort of an error, I guess. You could look at it as an error. To go into an actual implementation, so this is very simple as I was showing. You just change the text, add it, change the text, add it, so on. This part I don't think is important. Because I don't have it back in this one. Yeah, it's just this is just doing rectangle bounding boxes for the text itself. Anyway, I'll look at that again. It might actually have a reason. My bad. But anyways, all I have to do now is in the update function, I can do a check collision check. It's pretty simple, self-explanatory. If I on click, just run this function over here per sprite. So I'm not checking versus the text, and that's why I think this part isn't needed. I think originally I was, and then I realized the boxes are like I want to click over here, not just over here. Anyways, you check. Okay, well, so at position I, wherever this actually returns true, check if that position I is equal to whatever text you have up here, play game, options, so forth. And so with each one, turn unpaused, options, level editor, these are the different menu states that the menuing system can be in. So if we're here on the main menu, go back to main menu, you click options, right? It returns option, and then it loads up the options menu and starts updating that. So on. Pretty simple. What's unique about this implementation, I think, compared to some other ones, or what you might originally think, is to add a button object. The reason I didn't do this is actually incredibly similar to why I didn't do or why I originally wanted the, sorry about this, the abilities and weapons, passives, all that. It's the same reasoning. I didn't want to make a new object file per button, which at the time it seemed to me that I would need to do, each with its own unique update function, and then that would cause it to you you're already sending an update here into, or rather, you're taking the menus object, taking all this information from the main loop, putting it into the menu object now, and then what you do after that is put it into the button one. I felt like that was too much, um, for something that's going to result in basically the same thing, which is window that close if you quit, so on. Because I would instead, it would be, you do button dot update, and then you pass through the window as well, and it would then use that window to close it, just like this. And it's like, that seems like one extra step that I feel like is too much. But there's a drawback to that, which is the level editor, because the level editor is also a menu. And so I can show you here, oh, this doesn't use the same menu, it's the same layout generation. It uses a unique one. And I'll show you that. And you can see there's just so much here. This is a lot. It looks unwieldy. I've got it organized. I understand it, but obviously, if someone new looking at this, quite jarring. And that's what I don't like about it. And I might address this in the future, but at the moment, it works and it's serviceable. And I want to get onto other things. I've been working on this for a bit now. So, yeah, each position, each object here, or each quote button, because it's not an object button, it's, you have to define its position separately after you've already defined the text. And then of course, like, I have all this text, which results in the update, which it's not even an update. I separated it out just to be more clean. All these if statements, because with C++ you can't check, you can't use a switch statement with strings. So what I could do instead is use a switch statement with the position. But the problem with that, of course, is if I add these in a different order, I have to update that. And that's the main thing I wanted to avoid by using the string checks. That this positioning over here doesn't matter. But right here, you might notice these comments here. These positions do matter. And so I've already put myself in this situation where the organization of the vector up here, of the string vector, does matter because of this positioning. Well, more so when you come over to the update section, and you see if loading, and I'll show you what happens. So when loading is true, it's this. It handles this part. And the reason for that, these are all the same quote objects. It's the same bunch of strings and images that are being moved around. And that's why this if loading thing matters. Let's see. Find an example of that real quick. Oh, it's right here. I have it handled here. Arrange input menus. So this one does use a switch based on the ordering that it's in. So if I hit load level over here, it runs this code. If I run new level or save level, I have next. But you get the idea. It does each one. And then options is its own thing. You can move, delete things, but I don't have anything. But anyways, yeah. So this is the downside of not using a button object with its own custom update function, because what you'd have instead is you'd have a load level button, and that would handle its own set of these icons and text. So that's the main benefit. And like I said, I might revisit this. I might actually end up making a button object. um, if this becomes unwieldy. Right now, it's it's on the edge. Um, so anyways, I'll show you how this works. So add collidable. What you do, all you have to do is put in the x length and the y length. So for example, 2, and then this is important, and this is something, this is input handling. I'm not a big fan of doing a whole bunch of this. I'm thinking about readdressing this, but for now, you have to have the comma space and then 5 or whatever number. And it's made an object here as 2 by 5 of the wall link texture. So instead of, and I don't think or actually I think I did mention it, but the way I've done structures for this game is they're generative, as in as I showed, you just have to put in these basic specifications and it'll auto generate it. Another thing, real quick, is this is grid based. The placement of these based on the texture size. This is hard coded right now, but I'll update it. Uh, Whenever I feel the need to make a new texture for walls or have multiple textures, I'm sure that'll come up as I make more levels. But for the moment, I'm not quite there yet, so not a big deal. But you can see it's 150 by 150 on a pixel grid. I'm mentioning this because if I full screen here, well, it's still a 1080p screen. It's just pulled up. But if I want to support a different resolution, all I have to do is scale it. That's why I'm not too worried about this being a 1080 by 1920 pixel grid, because I'll just scale it later when I get to those options, the full screen options, video options. So, anyways, you have a collidable here, and you have the basic movement to move around the map and add stuff as you like. A new thing are these spawners, and this is for the enemies. So the way this currently works, it's the same input, but it's not for an X and Y. Instead, it's for the timer and the count. And I think it's actually goes the other way. The first number is how many enemies you want to spawn. 1 through 5 is it can go higher than that. But what's notable is so this is the timer. So between each spawn, this is 3 seconds. What's notable about this first number, the reason I said 1 through 5, is you'll see that one's green textured. If I do the same thing but with a 5, it's red textured, and that's because this is supposed to represent, this is a harder, more difficult spawner kind of thing. And then if I use 3 here, it's a medium tier, easy, medium, hard. You get the idea. Now, spawners themselves don't work. They work, but they don't have a proper implementation yet. And the reason for that is because I mentioned how I changed my approach to menus, which is different from abilities, health, and so on. I'm considering and probably going to try changing my approach to abilities, health, and so on into the same thing as menus. So I've already got this items file here with abilities. I just have to go through and add these. And this is why I was saying I'm not too concerned about this implementation here of the level editors, because I'm still technically not ready to make levels yet because of how the spawner works. And I still have to consider a way of adding unique abilities to each spawner. So it spawns a player character, except it's not controlled by the player, it's controlled by an AI, which is another thing I gotta work on. In time, I'll get there. But anyways, I have to add that kind of functionality, what kind of AI it uses, all in this screen here, and that's why I'm heavily considering succumbing to the button ideology, I guess, if you want to call it that. Anyways, another thing that's neat here is the save level. Neat, unique, new, whatever. So I can name it whatever I want, and that'll pop up in a file when I hit confirm. Let me dig up the file real quick. And it take too long. Yeah. So it's saved in a maps folder, and it has a map list. So this is the folder, and you'll notice this is all in text. So this is the position. Um, these are some other variables. I'll get to them in a second. But I do want to talk about, yes, this is in text versus just being kind of a memory dump. And the reason for that is I want this to be easily readable by humans, so we can debug it in a sense. Like, for example, if something goes wrong with the save, or if your files get corrupted or something, partially corrupted, you can look through here and you can say, oh, this spawner has a invalid value here, and you can see they're all separated by that, and it structures end. And it's easier for humans to interpret it and figure out what's wrong with your file, because I do want this to be, I want this level editor accessible to the users, not just me, the game creator. I would like or enjoy custom levels for this game. And on top of that, I'll mention I want semi-procedural generation. This is a roguelike, and that's one of the key things for it, is that the generation of the map is unique for every run. And so my idea for that is each collidable, or rather, I could have an entrance here. Let's say this area right here is an entrance, and you start here. I'm just putting in values just to show. So this is player spawn, we'll say. This can link up to another map if you, and I'll have to add another button and another object and so on. But anyways, I could say, let's say this is the demarcation for, this is where you add in another map that's loaded in the files, and it'll rotate it and whatever, and it's, well, that's the entrance now. So it's like, you could have a wall here that's like 4x1. Oh, my bad. 1x4. And it's you spawn here and you can go right, and now this is a new map that's loaded. That's my idea for it. The procedural generation. Oh, I forgot to update that. That's funny. I'll fix that in a moment after the video. But anyways, delete and move work, as you can see. Click it. So on. But anyways, that's my idea for that. And that's actually part of why I have maps list here as a file. And you can see it's just blank in FBS. New one we made. It, and the reason for that, I have the map object right here. This handles the saving in the map itself. This handles the map list so that over in the game, you can, when you initialize structures, it used to initialize collidables. Where did I put that? And this is another thing I want to address. This file's so big, I want to try and get it fixed. Yeah, so here, it used to initialize just that big building. Now it just initializes the map list, which then loads, well, it just loads the map list, which then, now I have it set up to load a random map. This is the basic procedural generation, just load a random map, and that's your whole map. But I'd like to do the connection thing, at least as an option. But anyways, I have the blank file. That's what you saw at the beginning. Oops. Which is just one collidable, one structure. Very simple. As I make maps, that'll change, obviously. We've made one here. And so now this random selection has a chance of getting the new one we've made. Let's see. So that was a lot of talk about the maps. Oh, right. One important thing to point out, the way the loading works between files, I guess. Not necessarily between files. It's more between scopes. So when I load structures and spawners, I have to use this variable made out, like, in the object scope, I guess. The reason I'm mentioning this is because it was a bug I had to handle not only with the maps but with the level editor, and then I think in a couple other places. But essentially, um, if I wanted to, and I can that if so it's one thing to have this here and following my mouse, because what's happening in the level editor, it's all here in the level editor object. But then I want to pass it to the map, and I'll point out real quick the way the sprites are drawn. You take from the temporary sprites, which are your mouse movement here, and then you take from the map structures and the map spawners. Very simple. But the important thing to note is when I add the new object, the collidable, the spawner, here. Well, I don't think it's not even adding here. This is the part that handles where you're moving your mouse cursor. Over here, so you set its position to where the mouse is, or rather, that's generating it, and then your next click is now set to add collidable. And so when you click it, it runs this part. But up until then, it's running this part, which is setting the position, rebuilding the collidable, and then updating the sprites, the temporary sprites. When you add it to the map object, what happens if I were to have a collidable made within this scope of handle clicks, or the other scope, or rather, what I used to have it was in the update scope. So here, when I went to add it to the map object, the textures would break because the textures, or maybe it's just the sprites pointing to the texture. It's a pointer, basically. And so it would be pointing back to the scope, and it's like, but I didn't realize this at first, but it would break, and it's really confusing. And that's why I'm pointing this out, is because it was hard to debug. That was something notable about this whole section. And so the solution to it, or at least maybe the easy solution, was to make the object here within the scope of the menu itself. So it's way back here instead of it being in the scope of a function. And now this exists, even though I'm overwriting it every time I'm making a new collidable, the texture still exists. The texture isn't being unloaded, which, bad and good thing that I'll see in the future how that affects some other things, such as like the temporary sprites and stuff. I'm pretty sure since I'm clearing it each time, it should be deleting it, but if I start to see memory leak problems, I'll address it. But at the time, nothing else really uses. I think the game, whenever I pick up objects, it shouldn't, because it passes it around more than making a new copy. But here it's making a copy of what's here. Something to keep in mind for me and for anyone else using SFML. But yeah, that was something notable about this project, or this section of the project. The other biggish change is the collision, and this was a huge, because the performance wasn't great whenever I had a bunch of bullets or a bunch of just objects that needed to collide on screen. It would go from, say, 200 FPS down to 60 really quickly with like 12 objects. It wasn't good. Another thing, while I'm mentioning FPS, the FPS is now doubled because I've changed how sprites are handled. I use more pointers now. That's another big change about this update. I'm more comfortable using pointers and references now, so I've put them where it makes a lot more sense, instead of before it makes a whole copy, and that's a whole process and not as efficient as just using a pointer. But anyways, the new collision now works on a sector type system. I think most people are kind of familiar with this idea where you have a bounding box for your object, but what ends up happening with this basic implementation, which is what I was using before. Well, I have this object, and now I have this object. So this object checks against this one, and this one checks against this one, and this one checks against this one, and this one checks against this one, even though I already checked. Whatever. It's a lot of checks as you get more objects, and that was my conundrum, my issue. And so the familiar solution is to do something like this. Okay, so this object's in this section, and there's no other object, so this doesn't have anything to check against. And you know inherently that these aren't colliding because they're in different sections. From my experience, from what I can tell, most people implement this as a list or like a matrix, so to say, a 2x2 vector. And you just keep everything in like, okay, this section here, or imagine a grid here that is the same as this box. This sector contains, or rather this sector, sorry, and it's a grid kind of 2x2. This sector contains all the things that collide. If we were to add another one, well, now these can do the collision check. I don't like that approach at all. And the reason for that is because it feels like extra work where it's not needed. So what I've done instead is I take the position, and this is the same way I do the lock on for this, or a similar concept anyways, where it locks to the grid. All I do is I take the position and divide by blank units, or yeah. So in this case, 150 for this lock on, but I think I have it set for 125 for the bounding thing. Which I'll adjust it as I need it, but anyways, the idea is you divide it by that, and then you check. Okay, we don't even have to. Whatever. Divide it by that. Cut the remainder off by casting it to an integer, or using ceiling in this case. For that's another thing to talk about, I guess, is how this works. But I'll get to that in a second if I remember. So anyways, you cut the decimal off the remainder, and you just have this one digit, and that tells you if you have a grid here, right? It's in. You say this is y x 0 0 over here in that corner. So this is 1 1. If your position is 120 by 175, you know you're in this box. If you have another object that, so what you do is when you divide by 150, you get 1, maybe 0. Quick math, whatever. I think the idea is there. Still understandable. Well, if your result is 1 by 1, well, now you can say, okay, these two objects, if they're two objects here, you can now check collision. If they're not, don't check collision. And I have the example, or I have the code implementation of it, rather, all the way down here. So that's what this part is. Or, no, sorry. That's the time to live for projectiles. Here, get sector. That's all this is. And this check here, a whole lot faster than the check collision check, which uses rectangular bounding boxes. Because all you're doing is you're comparing one number to another number. And you can see this doesn't quite work with structures yet, and that's why up here it's still the simple collision detection. But this is much faster. But there is kind of a downside to it, I think, which is that sorry, I lost my train of thought. The downside, oh right, if there's a lot of objects, you're doing this check a whole lot versus if you were to have a vector, a 2x2 vector that just contains it, running that check is a lot faster than this. But the thing is, you won't. I won't notice it. You won't notice it for a while because this game does currently run at 400, 500 FPS, and there's probably more performance to get out of it than that. And my goal is 60 FPS, um, minimum, anyways. So if this starts to get real bad, I'll re-implement it. But this is a quick fix. I put it in the get sector function here. You can see you just get the position, divide by 125, cast it to an integer, return that. It's so simple, so fast. I don't see myself running into an issue with this, but as I work on it, as I add more things, maybe I will. All right. I wanted to mention how the snapping to grid works. Let's see if I can find that real quick. Oh wait, no, it should be. Yeah, it's right here. So this is a slightly different from the get sector using the ceiling, and the reason for that is if I was around the center 0, 0, it would all result in the same spot. So I think it was like this corner. Let me get another. First, let me clear it, and then we'll just add another thing to help visualize. So in this center area, maybe it's here, um, it would all be locked into this position or this position. I think it was this one. So if I were to move my mouse here, instead of this updating here in the center spot, it would all be stuck in this position. So the ceiling prevents that by rounding up. So there's effectively not a 0, 0, because what the math worked out to be, oh, this is -0 by +0 because SFML works positive going down to the right. Anyways, it's -0, -0, or -0, -0, -0, +0. You have these different 0 types, and it's like, well, how do I fix that? And the solution is just to use ceiling, the round up function, and then also adjust for it because rounding up would put it over on this side. So -150, -150, or it'd be +150, +150. So minus, and now it works. It's perfectly fine. So yeah, I think that's it for pretty much everything here. Everything new. Um, you'll notice in the code if you dig through it, there's now fmod stuff. I'm looking to implement fmod for the sound system instead of using SFML's built-in one because I want to learn fmod itself. It looks really neat to use, and some more custom sound design options I feel like are available to me with fmod versus the built-in SFML stuff. Instead of having to build my own whole sound system, I just use fmod. As simple as that, I guess. But yeah, the stuff to look forward to for next update, and I'm hoping to get these updates out more frequently. This video's been pretty long for something uh, relatively small. It's not big explosions everywhere, whatever exciting. It's something very basic and simple, but there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of interesting topics when implementing a menu system. It turns out, which I didn't expect, but I guess I'm surprised, or I enjoy it, I guess. But yeah, so things I want to work on. I want to look at the abilities and items and so on, implementing it into a similar fashion as menus, or at least as similar as possible. I still want. So the reason I wanted the abilities and items to be loadable in the way that I said earlier, where you just put in some numbers and it spits out, it just works. I want the users to also be able to create their own abilities easily just by updating a file, similar to the map list. Um, just, oh, I want this ability. All I have to do is put in damage amount, the animation time, and so on. The type projectile. That's why this is built the way it is. Is for that. Um, but it it might be impractical, it might not. I'm going to figure that out, and I'll make a decision on which I like. And then of course the Fmod stuff. That is another thing I want to work on. But anyways, thanks for watching. That's all for now. See you next time.